I'm in Visual Studio 2022 and I want to create a new Visual Basic project. And when I create a new project, we can choose the language we want to use, Visual Basic, choose the platform and the project type. But notice there's a lot of things we can do with Visual Basic for all platforms and all project types. And I want to show you three in particular that you will come across when looking at Visual Basic materials and learning Visual Basic, whether it's textbooks or tutorials or videos. You'll probably come across some Visual Basic tutorials that use console apps. And I'll demonstrate the console app in a minute, but that is a text-based app. There's no graphics. It's great for some very quick, simple applications where you're just getting some data from the user. You want some text output. Then we have Windows Forms apps. These are desktop apps in Windows that are visual. They're GUI. This is what we're going to create throughout this course, our Windows Forms, and I just refer to as WinForm apps. And then there's WPF applications. That stands for Windows Presentation Foundation. They will look similar to WinForms apps. WinForms apps, we create the visual interface using the toolbox and the controls in that toolbox and dragging and dropping them on our form and changing the properties or drawing with them on our form. WPF applications, we use something called XAML, Extensible Application Markup Language. Very similar to what you'd find maybe like in an HTML web page. They are tag-based. And I just want you to make aware that, again, that sometimes you're looking at tutorials, you're going to see WPF applications. Really what you're looking for are WinForm applications to coincide with what we're doing. There's certain advantages to learning WPF and XAML. The WPF applications are a little more modern. They have some nice features in terms of effects, but they're much harder to create, in my view, than a WinForm app, creating the GUI for WinForms. So we're going to stick with WinForms here, but let me first walk you through how to create a console app, and then we'll come back and look at the other two. So I'm going to create a console app. I'm going to say next, and I'm going to call this Rectangle Calculator Console. I'm going to choose where I want it. I'm going to place the solution in the same project folder and click Next. I'm going to use the .NET 8 framework. And here is my console app. In fact, if I were to run this, there's our console, and we get Hello World. So that's the output. Very simple working project, kind of the ubiquitous Hello World project. I'm going to close that. We're going to change this to be a rectangle calculator, which we can get the width and the length from the user and then show them the area in the perimeter. So I'm going to get rid of this console.writeLine statement. I'm going to pause here, write my code, and then come back and walk you through it. Okay, so here's my code. We're using something called console.writeLine. Remember, we're using a console application. This is like setting the controls that we saw previously in our workflow demonstration. We're going to write to the console, so we're at a line that says this program will calculate the area and perimeter of a rectangle. And we're going to do another one that says given the width and length provided by you. And then I have a VBCRLF, that's the carriage return. Creates a new line. I'm going to ask them to enter the width of the rectangle. Now here I'm just using right. If I use right line, it automatically gives me a carriage return. If I use right, it's just going to write that line and keep the cursor at the end of that. And then I'm going to dim a variable as string, and it's going to equal readline. So we're going to get something from the user. The console.readline allows the user to enter something in. Now all this code is not going to pertain to our WinForms. It's a little bit different here in console. Then I'm going to do the same thing for length. I'm going to write a statement that says enter the length of the rectangle as an integer. So again, we're going to dim length as a variable, as a string. We're going to get something from the user using readline. And then I've got another variable here called dbl width, and we're going to take the width value, which is our variable up here, and we're going to convert that to a double. So we're going from a string to a double. String is text, double is numeric. We're going to do the same thing for length. We're going to create a variable called dbl length, which is a double type, and we're going to take length and convert it to a double. Now I can do my calculations on those numbers. I can't do calculations on strings, so I can say area is a double value, and it's going to equal dBl times dBl width times dBl length. That's going to calculate the area. The perimeter is also going to be a double, so I get perimeter variable. It's going to be dBl width plus dBl length plus dBl width plus dBl length. Okay, so we're kind of walking around that rectangle. Now I want to output. So I'm going to write again to the console the area of the rectangle is, and I'm going to take the area, convert it to a string to 2 decimal places. That's what the N2 is. And I just add units. We'll look more at this concatenation process of building strings in the next week. And here then is my output for the perimeter using the same vein. And then I just use another line that just says finished. VB console applications in Windows will allow us, will display the output and then a chance for the user to click any key to terminate that window. I just want to tell them it's finished. So let me run this and we'll see the console application run for calculating the area and perimeter of a rectangle. So we get our output. We're asked to enter the rectangle as an integer. I'm going to do 8 and then enter the length. Let's do 12. And I'm told that the area is 96 units, so 8 times 12, and the perimeter is 40 units. 8 plus 12 plus 8 plus 12 is 40. And then I get my finish statement. And then this is what Windows is displaying here, that the code exited, and we just need to press any key to close the window, and there goes our window. That is a console application. You will see books and you'll see textbooks and tutorials use this to simply teach the Visual Basic language, and when they don't want to fool with creating a user interface or a graphical user interface. For me, software development should include creating interfaces. So that's one reason I use WinForms over console applications. Next, let's take a look at creating a WinForms project. Now in Visual Studio, I'm going to create a new project. This one is going to be a Windows Forms app for Visual Basic. I'm going to call it A02. It's our second assignment. Rectangle calculator. I'm going to put the solution in the same directory, choose where I want to save it, and I'm going to choose my framework as .NET 8 and create. Rather than have you watch me create this project, I'm just going to show you my solution and walk you through what I've done. In the industry, we call this a code review. And oftentimes as a programmer or software developer, you're going to be working in a team or meeting with your supervisor and walking them through your solution line by line. And that's how I'll approach this course. So for every project I give you, I will give you my code review where I will walk you through my solution and explain my code of why I did what I did. Now remember, everybody codes differently. My solution is not necessarily the best solution, it is my solution. And there'll be times when I'll give you a solution that there will be an easier way to do it, but we haven't gotten to that content yet. So sometimes we'll do things a little bit of the hard way, or maybe the less readable or less elegant solution, but we'll get to those down the road. Here's my application as far as the form in the design. This is the GUI. So I started with the form itself. I gave it a text of rectangle calculator. I gave it a size of 580 by 320, and I set the back color to powder blue, and that is inside the web selections. You can choose any color you like. That's what I chose. Then I created a label, and I set my label. I stretched out the label to this length and height, and then I set the auto size of the label to false. I did not give it a name, so it has the default name of label 1. We're not going to refer to it in code. And then for the text, I entered this program will calculate the area and perimeter of a rectangle given the width and length provided by you. Okay, so that's the instructions to our user. I then created another label here kind of in the center. I named this one LBL rectangle, though I really didn't need to. I'm not going to refer to it in code. I gave it a back color of teal, a size of 245 by 96, and I just stretched that visually. I didn't necessarily type in those values. So again, we can create this whatever visual size we want. I set the text to enter the width and length, and then I did a carriage return with then click calculate. So in this box, you can press the enter key to get another line. And I gave a text alignment of middle center so that that text appears centered both vertically and horizontally. Again, this is kind of instructions to the user. I did change the font here to Hustedde UI 12 point. Then I created a label with the text of width. And next to that, I created a text box that I named TXT width. We are going to refer to that in code. I gave it a back color of a light yellow, and that was just from the custom colors, that first top yellow. Set the text to 6.5, so give me my default value, and I like to align numbers to the right, so I used a right value for text align. I then copied or selected both of those. So you can click on width, hold down the shift key, click on the text box, do a Control-C to copy, and then a Control-V to paste, and I move those over into this location, change the text of the label from width to length, and then for the text box, I simply changed the text to 10.25 and changed the name to TXT length. I left everything else the same. Next, I create a button, and I just dragged my button using the button tool, gave it a name of calculate, or text of calculate, and a name of BTN calculate. Then I created another label. This one I named LBL area. I set the text to area : and set the font to Hustedde UI 11 point bold. I copied my LBL area label, pasted it, dragged it to below the area one, named it LBL perimeter, and kept everything the same except for the text is perimeter : So these two text boxes are going to be for our input. The calculate button is going to do our process, and then these two labels are going to be for our output. All we need to code is the calculate button. So you can double click on the calculate button. It's going to handle the click event by default. And gives us a private sub event handler named btn calculate _ click by default with parameters of sender's object, e is event args, and it's going to handle the btn calculate.click event. And we get an end sub as the bookend to that event handler. And here's my code. I start with a comment that simply says input, get width and length, and convert to double values. And created two double variables called width and length. Again, that dim is dimension, width, and length as double data type variables. That's what that does. We'll talk more about that next week. The width is going to equal the text of txt width text box. I'm going to convert that to a double. CDBL is convert to double. Because that text is a string. I can't do math on strings. I have to convert it to a numeric value. That's a double value. I do the same thing for the length. Length equals CDBL, and then in parentheses, txt length dot text. Then we have our process. Again, just a comment that says we're going to calculate the area and perimeter. So I'm going to dim area as double, and it's going to equal my width value times the length value. Same thing for perimeter. I'm going to dim perimeter as double, and this could equal width plus length plus width plus length. Next, I have a comment for output. Again, comments are apostrophes or single quotes. The compiler is going to ignore anything I put there. LBL area.text. So I'm setting the text property of my label named LBL area to or equals a literal string of area. I've got an ampersand here which concatenates or adds to that string the value of my area variable converted to a string. That's what the toString does here. And inside the parentheses of that method, I've got a quote end2 quote. And that says give me 2 decimal places. I'm doing the same thing for our LBL perimeter label, setting the text value. Here I'm setting it equal to a literal string of perimeter with a colon and a space, concatenating with the ampersand the value of my perimeter variable converted to a string and showing 2 decimal places. Let me run this. Here's my application running. We have a default width of 6.5 and a length of 10.25. I simply click calculate. I get the area of 66.62. That's 6.5 times 10.25. And the perimeter, 33.5, is 6.5 plus 10.25 plus 6.5 plus 10.25. Alternatively, I could have done the width plus the length and multiplied those by 2. Now, if I change the values here, let's say this is 8 and 12, which we used previously in our console application. I get an area of 96, 8 times 12, and a perimeter of 40. 8 plus 12 plus 8 plus 12 gives me 40. Notice it gives me 2 decimal places. So that's our WinForm GUI application to calculate the area and perimeter of a rectangle. We can also do this using WPF, or Windows Presentation Foundation. I'm just going to show you what that looks like. We're not going to do any more WPF or probably any more console applications in this course, but I just want you to be aware of what that looks like. To create a WPF application for Visual Basic, I chose Visual Basic and then chose WPF application. Make sure I do the Visual Basic one. You can also do this in C# and click Next and create my application as we did before. I've already done this. Let me just show you my solution. So here's what a WPF application looks like. We create our GUI interface, very similar to what we did with Windows controls. In fact, you can use the toolbox to do that. But what's being created here is XAML code, Extensible Application Markup Language, very similar to HTML. And the advantage here with this is we can make modifications very easily in the code. So maybe, for example, I don't want like coral here. Maybe I want this to be red. Oops. I can change the color very easily there. I'm going to undo that and go back to light coral. So I set up my interface using both the controls here and the XAML tags. Now, a lot of programmers prefer to just work in XAML tags and kind of ignore the toolbox here and just do it with coding. Then there's also the code behind that ties into that XAML code. And I can access the editor for that code. Now I have a calculate button here. And just to demonstrate one thing, this calculate button has a click event that I specified as calculate. So then in my code behind for Visual Basic, I have a private sub calculate. That was the name I specified. Again, I have an object and in this case routed event args, a little bit different than the WinForm, and handling btn calculate.click. And this code will look pretty familiar. I'm creating variables of width, length, area, all is double, getting the width from our text box, converting it to a double value, same with the length, finding the area, finding the perimeter, and then outputting the values to our labels for LBL area and LBL perimeter. One big difference here is labels don't have text values, they have content values in the XAML VB code. But text boxes, interesting enough, have text values. Let's run the application. So here's our WPF application running. We have 6.5 for the width, 10.25 for the default length. Click calculate. As we've seen before, area 66.62, perimeter is 33.5. I can change this to 8 and 12 as we did previously, and we get 96 for the area and 40 for the perimeter. So that's our WPF application. We've seen we can create an application 3 different ways. One is a console text application, a WinForm GUI, or a WPF GUI. For the remainder of this course, we will focus on the WinForm GUI applications. They are easier to create than WPF. They're faster. That's why they often refer to WinForms as a rapid application development methodology, or RAD, and I think they're more fun to create. If you just jumped into this video, you can see all the videos from the Programming Practicum playlist by clicking on the image in the lower right. And if you'd like to be alerted to future videos I create, you can click my picture in the top right to subscribe to the channel.